Good morning. This is Karen A. from Jerusalem with the Afro-Euro Reco12 podcast. It is my honor and my privilege to be here with you because this is my recovery and my step 12, and hopefully it'll be yours too. Reco12 is a family of recovered addicts who have found experience, strength, and hope. I believe most of us work the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I'm pretty sure our friend Chris D., who we're going to host today, does too, by the grace of God. But we really welcome people from all fellowships, all people who have found the spiritual life in whatever way that has helped them recover from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body with whatever they put in their body, whether that's workaholism, alcoholism, and many other isms. We won't need to go into everybody's dirty details, but we know that they are varied and sundry. You can Google Reco12 in a little bit. In the chat, I will be putting in the information about how to be a Reco12 speaker, how to listen to our previous speakers. The major action here comes when people listen later, not less live, but all you are here live, you get first dibs, you get the God shot straight from the source, straight from the soul doctor who's recovered straight just for today. As for the seventh tradition, I'll post that in the chat. You can contribute through PayPal or Venmo. I'll also put my number to the chat. I'm available to sponsor women through our Big Book workbook based on the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And what else? I'll put my number in the chat. I'll ask Chris D. to do the same. Maybe he wants to do that before we get started. And if you're interested in speaking, sharing your experience, strength, and hope, your recovery story, or know someone else who might want to, please feel free to share that with me directly. Again, I'll be putting my number in the chat, or you could go to the Reco12 website, upload a speaker share on the SpeakPipe, or just reach out through the information there. We'd love to have more recovery in our time zone. There we go. Christy has put his number in the chat. Feel free to reach out to him. And without further ado, we'll jump in.
Brilliant. Okay.
We say the serenity prayer together. Does that work? And then
That works for me, yeah. Grant us the serenity to accept the things we cannot change.
Go ahead. Welcome.
Perfect. Okay, well, this just to confirm, yes, I do work the program out of the Big Book. And if there's 12 steps attached to it, then I'm probably a contender as well. My main fellowships are AA and CA, and I came in through Al-Anon. I'm very grateful for all the 12-step fellowships. I have to start at the beginning for me, which is that this is the best thing that has ever happened to me. You know, it's been the answer to what was my problems. It has continued to get better and better and better over the years, with ups and downs. It's like a gradual upward incline, with bumps and, you know, trials and tribulations all the way along. And I've had plenty of those. Everything that life can throw at you, I've had so far. So, or just about. So, I'm so incredibly lucky. I've struck gold twice. I struck gold in 2005 when I found Cocaine Anonymous and the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I struck gold again last year, where my recovery was fired up by really plugging in with the Spiritual Gangsters, Big Book sponsorship, Noodle community. If ever I doubt the existence of God, not that I do, but if I ever did, the way I found that community would be proof that there is some kind of guiding hand in my life, you know. So, and just to qualify, I mean, what started off as a big party for me at the age of 17, drugs, partying. I'd start drinking in North London. I'd go to see my friend in South London. We'd go to a nightclub in Central London. I'd go to an after party in East London, and I'd wake up in West London next to some girl who wasn't the girl that I'd met the night before, but someone completely. I go, this is amazing. This is absolutely fantastic, you know. And I used to work in some posh shops in London, and I'd have a smart suit and a bit of gel in my hair, and I'd be selling Christmas trees or light fittings or whatever it was. And my drinking was already way, way, way out of control at that point. And I'd bounced between different cities doing the geographicals. I ended up 24, having had this big party at the start of it. I'd gone to university for 5 years. I'd been kicked out of 2 universities and managed to do one essay in that time. I'd for the entire 5 years, I kept claiming every kind of grant you could possibly get from out of the system. So I ended up tens of thousands of pounds worth in debt with that, just that alone, as well as everything else I was doing. I ended up at 24 on my mother's floor. My mum was an alcoholic. She was dying of it. She was at the very terminal stage of it at this point. I hadn't held a job down in months. I was lying, cheating, and stealing just to eat, not just forget the drink and drugs. I was always surrounded by drink and drugs. I was always had friends who were very generous, or people who were selling drugs and would give me drugs, or I'd managed to do a bit of dealing. Very, very unsuccessful drug dealer. I'd always end up my best customer and then my only customer. And then I would be in all sorts of trouble. The other problem for me, drug dealing, was I look a lot like a policeman. I'd always get it. I'd go to parties and raves and I'd be trying to sell drugs and they'd always say, are you an undercover policeman? And, my self-esteem was shattered as it was without being accused of being an undercover policeman. So, but I kind of just eked along really. And I ended up on my mum's floor, as I say. I found myself in some Al-Anon meetings around that time. And I went to an AA meeting at that time as well. But so I got an inkling of what was available in 12-step recovery. And what happened for me was I went on a drug binge so kind of severe, it must have done something to my central nervous system, but I was up for about 3 days. I was in psychosis. And I had some kind of spiritual experience in that moment. And it was, at the time, afterwards, I wrote it off. I said to myself, look, you haven't slept for 3 days, you're off your nut. You were kind of, that was just, that was the drugs. But fortunately, Bill didn't write his spiritual experience off. He kind of based the whole 12-step fellowship on it, so I didn't. I wrote it off. But I now believe God made contact with me at that point when I needed him, just to let me know that he was there. And whenever I wanted to throw the towel in, God was going to be there for me. So from that, I made the first attempt to really sort my life out. I got a job. And in this job, I met a wonderful girl. And this wonderful girl had a faith, and she had a flat. And she said, look, she recognized a lost soul when she saw one. So she took me in essentially off the street and set me up. So I went very quickly from shoplifting, sleeping on my mum's floor, watching her drink herself to death, to suddenly surrounded by people who were not drinking. I had a very, very brief period of sobriety in that experience. I had about 3 to 6 months sober, I think. I may have been smoking a little bit of weed. I wasn't drinking, doing ecstasy, doing coke or anything else. So for me, that counted as pretty much sobriety at that point. And I was absolutely convinced at that point that I was fixed and I'd never go back. Knowing what I know, this self-knowledge thing that I read about in the big book, knowing what I know, there's no way I will end up back in that hole again. And it turned out I was wrong, and I did end up back in the hole again. And very, very quickly, there's a very, very fine line, and I didn't realize it. I had no power behind me. I'd had a little bit of time away from the drink and drugs, but there was nothing really keeping me in that state. And so very quickly, the job, the girl, the flat, the faith, all of that went, and I spent another 3 years on the misery go-rounds. But two really important things came from that. One was that in that time period, I went to my first AA meetings, and I remember the very first one I went to. I've met the guy who did the chair. He spoke about the physical allergy, setting alcoholics apart from normal drinkers, and that every time he drank, he would lose control over how much he drank. And at 24, I had an instant identification with that. I instantly knew that that's what happened to me. I just sat there and thought, if that's what an alcoholic is, then I am one. Do you know what I mean? I'd had all sorts of ideas about what an alcoholic was. My mum had been an example of it, but I didn't really understand the dynamics of it. And that meeting set me straight as to what that was. But that was only part of the puzzle. So I spent another 3 years experimenting with the powerlessness before I pick up a drink. That at certain times, I just can't fend it off. No matter how much I want to stop, it slips onto my radar. The other thing that really came from that experience was that that 3 month period or 6 month period, whatever it was, to experience my addiction untreated with no drink and drugs and no program was horrifying, And I quickly went from walking on the pink cloud, walking along, clicking my heels, to waking up angry, getting angrier through the day. Couldn't wait to go to sleep just to shut my head up, and that was a very, very painful experience, And eventually, of course, I picked up. So yeah, three years of experiencing powerlessness before the first drink to really diagnose myself. AA had raised the bottom up for me in the sense that it made me aware of the physical allergy. It gave me something to work with on that front, but I couldn't figure out for the life of me why I kept on picking up. Um, and it's important to say, there's a great saying in AA that's the only thing worse for an alcoholic than bad luck is good luck. And for me, I came into a sum of money, and my mum had passed on, which is obviously not good luck, but she'd had a flat, and I sold that flat, so I ended up with a big chunk of money. So that limiting factor of money stopped being a limiting factor for me, and my drinking using went stratospheric. Um, what I actually intended to do was buy a ticket to Brazil and do some traveling. It could have been a deposit on a flat or something like that, but I was going to do a little bit of travel and maybe see what was left. But what I in fact did was go to the pub and phone the dealer, and I spent probably less than a year blazing through that money. I came out of it with two really important things: a big book and the gift of desperation, and that's what that money got me, which, as we know, is absolutely priceless. And you can go a long way with big book and the gift of desperation. So um, I've never regretted losing that money. I've never regretted spending that money. It got me to where I needed to be. So I staggered into a Cocaine Anonymous meeting in December 2005. I arrived in the perfect spiritual state for it, which was that I was pitiful and incomprehensible demoralization, completely broken, could not fathom what had happened to my life. I was seeing my life go down the toilet in slow motion. I don't remember a lot about that meeting, but I do remember the next day, my phone went, and it was a guy from the meeting. I must have given my number out. So he said, I'm going to another meeting tonight. Do you want to come? And I said, you know what? I'm going to sleep it off today. I'm in a state. I'll come back to you. And I've done this before. This had happened to me before. And so I put the phone down and laid back in bed. And something compelled me to get back up out of the bed, pick up the phone, and phone that man back and say, yes, I will come to that meeting. And I believe that was my higher power showing up. If ever I kind of, if that was all I understood of my higher power, that's all I would need to work this 12-step program. When I needed some help came to me, some willingness came to me that I didn't come from within me, came from elsewhere. And so I went to the second meeting I went to that evening. He took me to a meeting. We went in, and I was around the side next to the kind of the side entrance to this big booming meeting. There's probably about 40 or 50 people in there in a really small room. The energy was incredible. I fixated on a guy in the front row who had this look of joy on his face. He was laughing at the chair and he looked so happy. And I thought, I had this feeling of hatred for him, you smug, fat so-and-so, how dare, it felt like he was laughing at me. The self-pity emanating off of me was immense. So, but by the end of the meeting, I was completely and utterly sold. What I wanted, what that guy had on a Friday night, to be happy, laughing in a meeting. I assumed he was clean and sober, and it turned out he was. He's my friend now, Bob the Cab. So just I was sold non-verbally on this program. His whole deportment shouted, "This is a real solution. This can work for you." So I asked this gentleman, Jason, to be my sponsor. Jason L in London. Shout out to Jason L. And he took me through the big book. I had a very profound experience realizing that I'm a basic garden variety addict alcoholic. And this book was written by someone like me, for someone like me, 70, 80 years before I was reading it. And it was profound. So step one, clearly, the elements of that I'd seen play out in my life: the physical allergy, the powerlessness before picking up a drink, the mental obsession, and then that underlying spiritual malady where I couldn't cope with life. I couldn't cope with life without drugs. I couldn't cope with life with them, and I couldn't cope with life without them either. Steps 2 and 3, I'd been open-minded about that previously. I'd tried religion. I'd also had, a couple of spiritual stirrings. So that wasn't such a big step for me. And we got to step 4 and 5, and I was ready to just vomit all this stuff out onto paper: my resentments, my anger, my fear. In that, I'd been being eaten alive by a couple of resentments. I had hundreds of resentments, some minor, some really severe. And the couple that were eating me alive were my mum for being having just gone through my own experience of powerlessness. I suddenly saw my mum in a whole new light. She had been as powerless as I was. but she'd had two kids to contend with. So the torture she must have endured as a mum, an alcoholic mum, it broke my heart. I suddenly went from anger and bitterness to compassion and empathy, and the real tragedy of that situation was A, that she suffered so much from her alcoholism, and B, that she ended up dying an alcoholic death. She pursued it to the gates of insanity of death. She left me and my brother a great gift because we're both in recovery, and we've both seen firsthand where this thing ends for people. So and then my dad, I had this sudden moment of compassion for my dad. My God, he tried to keep our family together. Easy for me to look back and say he should have done this and he should have done that, but he did his absolute best. And as a dad now, I have even more compassion for him because I know how hard it is. So with alcoholism in the mix, yeah, tremendous healing happened for me then. I just have to say, I have to qualify that by saying every inventory I've ever done, or on regular occasions, I've had to do inventory about both of them. New things have come to light, but in that moment, I experienced true healing, and it was just absolutely amazing. And not to go through all the steps, but I had the experience of being in a position of neutrality after, or in the course of making amends. I got invited to a family do. And I realized I'd been sat next to the bar for about half an hour, maybe something like that. And it just hadn't drawn my attention at all. It was the first time that I'd either not wanted to drink, and I wasn't trying to avoid drinking. I wasn't trying to get drink, and I wasn't trying to plan how I was going to get some drink out of there. It just was, I was just immune. It was just there, but I hadn't even noticed it. And it was the first time I'd experienced that in my entire life. And I remember phoning Jason and saying, it's worked. This thing has worked. I'm in a position of neutrality. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. So I've been sober for a long time now, and there's been lots of healing in multiple areas of life. I came in at 27. I was 27 years old. I was mentally about 15. All of that growing up, I had to do. I had to have heartbreaks. I had to have disappointments in work. I had to have successes, which are sometimes it's hard to deal with. I've really grown up in recovery. I'm a product of 12-step recovery. I've got a great, fantastic family, and they've tried to teach me these principles. But until I found recovery, I couldn't see it for myself. I rejected everything from them, and it's really, I'm a product of 12-step recovery, really. So I've got a brother in recovery, as I say, he's coming up for 10 years. That's been a real gift. We couldn't sit in the same room together. I've got married. I've got two beautiful kids, 3 and 6. I've got a career. I'm a family member. I'm right in the middle of my family. I have to tell a story about my dad, because I made amends to my dad and I'd attacked him. One of the last things I'd done drinking was I blacked out and I'd attacked him, and he'd just been doing a year of chemotherapy, so he was as weak as a kid. And I remembered all of it. So I blacked out, and my behaviour had blacked out, but I just remembered this look of terror on his face. And that and many other things, lying, cheating and stealing, I went and made amends to him for. And we had about 5 good years. The first 5 years of my recovery, it was an important relationship that I invested in and made a real effort. And I still found it difficult sometimes, and he probably did as well. But and then in 2011, he got very ill. He had a kind of a lymphoma, and his body produced an antibody to attack the cancer. They actually attacked his brain, so he was left compos mentis, but acutely disabled. And his partner left, and my brother was at that point was in his own alcoholism, and he wasn't able. So I ended up taking on this responsibility with my dad, and it's one of the things I'm most grateful for in recovery, that I was clean, sober, in recovery, and able to take that on and look after him, really. And they gave him 2 years. He survived 11 years. In the early part of that, I fought it tooth and nail. I couldn't believe God would be so unfair as to dump this on us, to do this to someone. And I completely lost my faith for a period. And the only thing, thank God I didn't pick up, but the good thing I would say about that would be that I realized the limits of my own power. I had an experience of Chris D in the world with no God, and I end up on that page 52 stuff, the bedevilments. I can't control my emotional nature. I have a feeling of uselessness. All of that stuff comes back. And funnily enough, in the course of that experience with my dad, I rediscovered my faith. I got out of, as the book talks about, we have a new employer. We perform his work well. We sit close to him and perform his work well. In the course of that experience, I realized God wants me to do some work in this situation. He wants me to look after my dad. He wants me to be a loving, kind, compassionate presence in my dad's life, because he really needs that right now. And so when I focused on that, And when I focused on what my dad wants rather than what I think my dad would be good for my dad. So I was always trying to get him a befriender or get him to see a priest or a rabbi. An imam, if there'd been an imam there, I'd put an imam in to see him, someone who can talk to him about the spiritual. He didn't want to do that. He just wanted to see his kids, his grandkids and his kids, listen to music and watch rugby. They were his interests. Well, when I focused on those things, particularly the grandkids, the challenge for me in recovery has always been consistency. I will work at a really tight program for a period. I'll forget why I'm in such a good state, and then I'll stop. I'll drop things out. Now, I have to say, I picked up a chip at the tail end of 2022, a 17-year chip. And I had it in my hand, went to this meeting and I had it in my hand. And I called it my Wile E. Coyote chip because I held this chip in my hand. And as nice as it was to see that amount of time, I realized I no longer, me and my sponsor have parted ways. I have no current sponsees. I have sponsees who are a few years around and I hear from sporadically, but I have no one who's new. I'm not doing any work with newcomers. I'm dipping into meetings. I'm going in 5 minutes late and I'm leaving 5 minutes early because I'm doing it on my lunch break. My spiritual connection is tenuous at best. I'm praying every now and again. But what I fundamentally realized was I'm no longer working a 12-step program. And this chip is not a mental defense. It's not a psychic change. It's not a spiritual experience. It's not conscious context. None of the things that I understand to be what I need to cope to overcome alcoholism. It's just a little chip of metal. And if the insane idea comes back, I'm not going to be able to fend it off with this little chip. So that was a really, really humbling moment. I called it my Wile E. Coyote chip because it was like the old Wile E. Coyote, the old Roadrunner cartoons where he'd fly off the cliff and his legs would be pumping. And he doesn't actually realize he's off the cliff. And then he suddenly looks down and falls. And for me, fortunately, that awareness came to me while I was still sober. But it was a humbling moment. And I realized I need to plug back in to recovery. Long story short, a series of really earnest prayers. I've got prayers that I do kind of just, I'm going through the motions. And then I've got prayers that are slightly more meaningful. And then I've got the ones where I'm hitting my knees, asking the creator of the universe for help because I am out of ideas and I'm out of resource. And this was one of those prayers. And long story short, I ended up plugged in with the spiritual gangsters. In that period of time, I'd fell victim to the delusion that a long period of sobriety allowed me to think like other people, and so there'd been a couple of resentments that I just settled for. I just thought they're part of the human condition, and I'm just going to have to live with them. And that's a very they are a part of the human condition, but for alcoholics, they're fatal. And I'd taken my eye off the ball, or I'd worked my program around it, and just it hadn't quite worked, and I'd settled for that. There was more work to be done, and I wasn't doing it. The funny thing about finding spiritual gangsters was I swore at the start of the last year that I was never going to do any more online meetings. I had enough of online. I'm only going to do face to face, and it turned out that the reignition of my program would happen online. With online meetings and online sponsorship. So I found spiritual gangsters. I plugged in with David F in Manchester. Shout out to David F. I found it an amazing experience. I mean, 12 steps is a spiritual experience as the result of this of these steps. And bingo, I had a spiritual experience as the result of these steps. I went through it. I didn't have a huge amount of resentments or amends, but the ones I had were big, and I needed to tackle them. And when I made them, I was absolutely lit up. It was profound, absolutely fantastic. I know that I'm in the world of the spirit because quite shortly after making those amends, I've got a health issue going on. It's a heart condition, and it flared up, and I ended up in an A&E. I ended up in a resus unit with really straight. I'd made the amends on Monday. Following Tuesday, I'm end up in this hospice. This health thing flares up. So I ended up in a resus unit with the defibrillator pads on, and more doctors coming around looking more and more worried. And I'm there going, my God, this could be it. This could be the end of Chris D. So I had a very strange experience in that. I had a couple of strange experiences with that, but one was, and I heard a speaker say this, I think it was Dennis T on the other Reco, and yeah, I think I can't remember what his health situation was, but he'd had a similar experience. My experience of that, so I was in this resource unit with the defibrillator pads on, considering my own mortality, and a thought popped in, which is that God is going to show up in this. God is going to demonstrate his omnipotence, and he's going to blow your mind, Chris. And it was the amazing thing that has happened for me over a long period of time is that very cynical part of my brain that always would write a miracle off or discount the possibility that God had saved me or whatever it might be, is even that part of my brain is now convinced, because I've got enough empirical evidence over the years that God will show up. God's plans are better than mine. God will demonstrate his omnipotence. And so I had that experience on in that hospital bed. And that heart condition is ongoing. It's still an issue. It's being investigated. But one of the gifts that's given me is my prayer life is on fire. My feeling of connection with my higher power, my awareness that I have a physical body and I'm only on planet Earth for a certain amount of time. I better make the most of that time that I'm here. So that's an amazing gift. My cynical part of my brain has been rewired to know that there is a God, and I no longer struggle with that kind of feeling of, is this all a bit silly? It's like my faith has become absolute certainty. So one of the old ideas I had to get rid of was about time of recovery, because I got very preoccupied with, being a certain amount of time sober. And this is actually about quality of recovery on a daily basis by working this 12-step program, by working with others, by keeping resentment free, by really working on that conscious contact with God. Time is wonderful, but time is a byproduct of working a really good program. Time in and of itself, if that's what I'm relying on, and I'm hiding behind a 17-year chip, I'm in serious trouble. I'm very, very, I'm like, I'm a sitting dog. My kids know that daddy's doing something so I can hear them in the background with my wife. So just to say one last story, I made an amends to my dad. He passed on so I made an amends to my dad. He died in 2022, and I did a letter to him. The amend was really, I did the absolute best I could for him over that 11-year period, but there were certain times of it I was doing through gritted teeth, and I was angry at him for imposing on me or what have you. I didn't see the sanctity of that situation. That situation with my dad was a gift from God. It was a sacred service commitment. God had voted me, and he didn't even do a group conscience because he's God. He doesn't need to do a group conscience. And he put that on me at a point where I was able to cope with it and to deal with it. So, but it was a sacred service commitment, like the same way my kids are, a gift from God. So in thinking about that, I thought to myself, if I didn't recognize the sanctity of what happened with my dad, what else in my life am I not realizing is a sacred gift? One of them is obviously being a parent and being a husband. That is, my family are a gift from God to me, and my real responsibility is to cherish that gift, not just to treat it as a sacred gift. Sponsorship, being a recovered addict and being able to help other addicts is a sacred gift. We go through the hell that we go through. We find ourselves recovered and able to give that away, and it needs to be treated with that degree of respect. But the other one, and then suddenly the thought popped into my head, was all of it, all of life, every minute that I'm above ground is a sacred gift. So that's being in the world of the spirit, that's seeing life as it really is. There's a great AA speaker, Mark H, who used to talk about, a story about the dog. Two duck hunters go duck hunting and they shoot a duck, and the dog jumps out of the water and walks on the water, picks the duck up and jumps back in the boat. And one of the guys is looking at it going, wow, that dog's just walked on water. And the other guy doesn't see the miracle of it, and for me, being in the world of the spirit, I see the miracle, how lucky I am to be alive, how lucky I am to be in a recovered state, how lucky I am to be surrounded by the fellowship that I'm surrounded by. This is an amazing journey. And Karen, I think I'll leave it there. It's 12 past.
Okay, amazing. Thank you. And that is a great segue into a question that we got. You started touching upon it. The question we got is, would you like to speak, or can you speak about your emotional sobriety, the emotional part of the program, whether it was the unmanageability before, or?
Yeah, yeah, what a journey. For one thing, I was a freeze-dried alcoholic addict. Had all the spiritual malady, all that emotional stuff raging in me, 15, 16, 17. And they're difficult ages for kids, aren't they? You know. But I had that sense of kind of dissatisfaction. I remember going to school at one point after a particular holiday and just going in, and it was like, and drink and drugs obviously fixed that particular problem. When I got sober, as I say, I was mentally about 15, and I the biggest period of growth for me was probably the 6 months, a year of doing daily inventory after I got first clean and sober, because I found myself in a job dealing with other people, how petty and oversensitive I could be, you know. And I remember one particular one, I had a clash with a lady. I had a little kind of was bickering with a colleague, and she said to me, "Look, I'm not the only one who thinks around here who thinks you're weird." And it got to me. This thing was eating me alive. My brain is going, A, she thinks I'm weird. B, other people think I'm weird. What's weird about me, you know? And really got inside my head. So the emotional recovery has been long, slow, some of it very painful. It's a joy when you're experiencing it, because I find with every resentment that I have, or every emotional disturbance, there's going to be some wisdom at the end of that. I'm gonna grow, and I'm gonna learn. I'm gonna develop. The big book talk. I mean, yeah. In terms of emotions, the big book talks about being in fit spiritual condition, which I kind of equate with emotional well-being, and physical fitness, defined as how quickly your heart returns to a normal rate after exercise. My heart is not a good example because of my heart condition, but for other people, for normal people, so how quickly can I recalibrate after getting bent out of shape? You know, that resentment that I had against that lady, Rebecca, who had to dig at me, I probably wouldn't get it now. I probably wouldn't be in a situation where I was bickering with a colleague at all. If I did say something I didn't like, I'm sure I'd deal with it a lot better. But for me, emotional sobriety has come with continued inventory, continued spiritual connection, blood, sweat, and tears of actually being prepared to do that work. SLA was a fantastic fellowship for me. I was completely bonkers around internet dating, and that was driven by self-pity. But a lot of the work I did in that seemed to even out a lot of my emotional kind of immaturity. And so I hope that answers the question. I mean, it's a fantastic program for.
Okay, I'm gonna jump in on that question, Chris. Talk about your daily recovery regimen for emotional sobriety. Can you take us into a deep dive into your daily recovery regimen?
Sure. Yeah.
How do you stay sane one day at a time?
Yeah. 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 Well, God has blessed me with an abundance of young family, job, wife. Until recently, I had a big service commitment with my dad. So life is very, very busy. If I'm outward focused, if I'm trying to be of service to people, I tend to get less and less of the kind of day-to-day resentments that we tend to be prone to. But my regimen is I wake up, I hit my knees as soon as I can. I say a couple of set prayers, step 3 prayer being one of them. And then I go straight into looking after my kids. I get my 3-year-old ready for nursery. I get my 6-year-old ready for school. As soon as I have a break in a window of opportunity, I do, upon awakening, straight out of the big book. I spend about 10 minutes. If I can do 15 or could do longer, I will, but it's generally about 10 minutes on a weekday. Go through the day. I think about what's ahead of me. I think about what God would want me to be doing. I think about ways that I can be useful. I think about how I can help the man who's still suffering. I'm looking for an intuitive thought or idea. I try and jot those down. My experience with it is if I don't do something with those intuitive thought or ideas, they stop coming, they dry up. Why would God send me an assignment if I'm not going to do anything with it? So I do that. So in an ideal world, I do all of that as soon as I woke up. But I do it in two chunks. I do a God, please help me. I'm down here. I turn my life and my will over to God at that point. I ask Him to direct my thinking, and then slightly later I do upon awakening. I try and have a midday prayer, maybe another set couple of prayers. Whenever I'm praying, what I'm trying to generate is some feeling of appreciation for God, really, and remembering how grateful I am, how blessed I am. Even with this heart condition, when I have an episode, it's very, very difficult. It's intense. I have a really, really fast pulse. I have to bring it down with medication. But the way I find most helpful, most effective with that particular issue is when I'm having an episode, I need to thank God for the 85% of the rest of the time where I'm strong as an ox, where I'm absolutely fine. Yes, I'm having an episode now, but I've got so much else to be grateful for. If I'm sitting there just thinking, God, I've got this going on, please help. Or if I sit there and say, God, I'm so grateful for all the physical health you have given me, and I'm going to deal with this as best I can. So I try and focus on appreciation, gratitude. I'm trying to look for that feeling of connection. Just saying kind of prayers by rote, I don't find so effective. I don't find so meaningful. For me, it's more about a spiritual connection. Yeah. And then I do a prayer at the end of the day, and I do my daily inventory. My current sponsor is very big on 10, 11, and 12, does daily inventory, so I share it with people. If he feels a need to pick something up with me or spot something on there, then he'll do that. But for me, it's about routine. Now, Karen, you'll probably relate to this as a mum, but I found my kids one of the biggest obstacles to actually work in a 12-step program. Because as soon as anyone wakes up in this house, it's everything's going off. There'll be a potty needs changing, there'll be fighting, my son will have fallen down the back of the sofa. It's chaos. So moments of peace and quiet in my house are quite difficult to come by, but it's up to me to carve those out, and I have the opportunity to. I don't have a great deal of it, but I need to stay in fit spiritual condition as a parent. It's the biggest challenge I've got. It's I really notice if I'm not working a good program, I get more tetchy with the kids, or they'll annoy me more. I'll feel completely overwhelmed. So for me, having a really rigid set of
Sorry, I was on mute. I definitely relate to that. And I definitely find it humorous when I've made the dire mistake of reaching out to a fellow in recovery who does not have children. You ever done that one?
Yeah.
And they're telling you you're selfish, and they're telling you don't have God, and you're like, no, you just don't have children. All right. You don't know what I'm talking about. I get that. And share about your parenting when the kids start fighting, when you find like you're losing your cool, when it gets out of control.
That wonderful step 11 pause. Sometimes I practice it better than others, but one thing I was thinking about is not just for parenting, but life generally, recovery generally. Right at the end, it's almost the last word in the big book. He uses the word trudging, and Bill chose every word carefully. Obviously an amazing writer, and but at this point, he's gone through kind of the torture of step one. He's taken us through the program. He's taken us into the world of the spirit, and then he's given us to wives and to employers and a vision for you. And this is what a recovered, God-conscious person going about their life looks like. And so he's taken us on that whole journey. And then right at the end, he says, we'll be with you in the fellowship of the spirit, and you will surely meet some of us as you trudge the road of happy destiny. And that word trudge, I think that's a spiritual principle in itself. It means kind of march with determination or with purpose. And that's what I need to do as a parent. I needed to do it in that experience with my dad. But we're not always going to be walking along clicking our heels. It's not always going to be peak experiences. Sometimes we're going to be marching determinedly. Sometimes we're going to be,
Is that what trudge means?
I believe it does. Let me just.
I need to look that up. I sort of thought it meant like trudge, like drag, like, oh God, I got to do this. Like, but that doesn't really make sense. I really just need to look it up on Google or something, unless you have a dictionary in front of you.
Move oneself slowly along, walk or march steadily, usually with difficulty, which, that kind of rings a bell for me.
Yeah.
But also focus on, day to, minute to minute when my kids are throwing a tantrum or fighting each other. I may not have that much gratitude, but I need to keep on generating it. I thought I'd missed the chance to have kids. I was in a relationship for a period of time where she didn't want kids and wanted to get married. I didn't want to get married unless there were kids. So the Rubik's Cube at the middle of our relationship that we could never solve. So I was blessed and privileged to meet my wife at the right time. And it's just, life has just gone stratospheric since that. And also just on the trudge bit, I mean, there have been times where I've been in a job or, to say, in a relationship, and things haven't made sense. It's felt like this is just going nowhere. This is just pointless. But in retrospect, I can see that I was being prepared for something. I was so in a job where I was really bored and disillusioned with it. The skills that I have in that have paid off in the job I'm in now. They equipped me for it. That relationship where I was with someone who didn't want the same thing as I did prepared me to look for someone who does want the same thing I do, and is on the same course as me. So that's another meaning of trudge. If I had a bit more time.
I can't even tell you how much I love what you're saying. I mean, first of all, this is like a light bulb moment for me, because I kind of related to the excuse my Yiddish, schleppy part of it, trudge, like, oh God, okay, I got to pray. Like, oh God, I got to make lunches. Oh God, I got to fill water bottles, and I don't mean G-O-D in the spiritual sense. I mean like, oh boy, oh grief.
Yeah.
Like complaining, kvetchi again with a little more Yiddish in there. But what I'm hearing and what you're saying this time is that when I'm trudging the road of happy destiny, it's that rinse and repeat, right? I get up, I pray, I get up, I don't pick up. Or I exercise. I started exercising as a gift of my next level, being catapulted into the fourth dimension. Exercise multiple times a week. And it's like, even if I'm late, I just put on my sneaks and put on my workout clothes and I go. And little by little, I become a person who's hitting the gym several times a week. I'm becoming an athlete again when I'm, close to age 50. And it's just like that with parenting, right? Just like that with sobriety. Like I made a lunch and I made another lunch and I made supper and I folded the laundry again. And all those, singular bits of trudging the road of happy destiny, marching on, even though it's hard. Some of those things make me a pretty good parent, a reliable parent, right? Or a recovered addict or a athlete.
Absolutely. Yeah. We talk about spiritual principles, patience, tolerance, kindness, and love, and the book talks about the broad highway. And I think of that broad highway when I'm practicing those spiritual principles. I'm on the broad highway, and the broad highway is open, it's expansive, we're going fast, the sky is looking beautiful. When I take my wheel back, I go off road. I'm going to go off the broad highway. I'm going off road. I'm crashing through a forest of resistance, and parenting's just like that. Every aspect of my life really is like that. If I'm prepared to practice spiritual principles, I'm in tune with God's will. I'm moving ahead. If I stop practicing spiritual principles, I'm in for a world of hurt, But these spiritual principles work in all areas of our life, particularly as parents. It's just a fantastic way of life. It's my experience is, if I'm rolling with God's will, or if I'm in my own will, I end up in the same place. It's just, do I do it incredibly painfully and slowly with my will? Or do I do it with a sense of acceptance and serenity and peace with God's will? And I hope I can practice that later on today when I'm looking after my 3-year-old and my 6-year-old. I'll have to listen back and remind myself of what I've been talking about. But it's easier said than done, but it does work. It does work.
Right. Well, I'm really taking two things for this, Paul. You said so many great things and everybody should take their own, but I'm going to highlight for those who like a little bit of assistance. There's the trudge, there's the moving along steadily and slowly, which is one day at a time. And if you just put down the booze or the cocaine or the whatever it is you're sticking in your orifices and pores, or heart or mouth, it's one day at a time, right? It's not Disneyland and it's not Six Flags. It's one day at a time. It's trudging. And the next thing I love about what you said is the broad highway. As you may have seen, I'm in my car at the moment. I'm also thinking about when I'm working my recovery program, my world is really expansive, and you need to know many recovered addicts. Cameron F talks about that. A good sign of recovery for those of you who sponsor, this is a good barometer of how good your sponsees are doing or how good you yourself are doing. A lot of people go back to school or have dental work. Like, the broad highway looks like I'm learning something new. I'm not, as the big book says, in my little plans and designs, who hurt me, who talked to me, who didn't talk to me, who gave me attitude, what's my mood like, how am I feeling? Like, when I'm on the broad highway, on the broad highway, I studied to be an emergency medicine medic. Many of my fellows studied to be addictions counselors or went back to school or got a degree or got a new degree. Got a different kind of job. If you're meeting new people and you're learning new things, you're probably on the broad highway. And I love Christy's analogy. When I'm starting to get, my shorts in a knot and starting to get, upset or fudging my spiritual program, it gets really narrow. And what I want y'all to picture is that the broad highway is this big road. Narrow means like you're on the shoulder of the highway. There's not much room there. And very likely that a car could come speeding by and knock you dead. Like the shoulder, or when there's no shoulder, when you're off the broad highway, like your chances of survival have just decreased to close to none, right? You're here in Israel, people drive, bless them, they drive like maniacs with a Mediterranean temperament. And it's like, if you, God forbid, got a flat tire and you're on the side of the road, like, you're in trouble. So you better stay on the broad highway. You better get your tune-ups, check your tires. Let's go with that car and road analogy that the big book gives us. You want to do that if you don't want to get hit and blindsided, right?
Yeah. Absolutely. They talk about this, the easiest off the way. This is the easiest off the way of living life.
Amazing.
Yeah.
We have one more question. And then I think, I don't know if I told you, but you are going to pray us out. So, but I trust you, brother. One question we have is, how do you put your recovery in? How do you work your program with a difficulty? Like, you really said it beautifully, like your heart condition. I love what you said, higher power. I know that you're going to pull me through this time. And the big book talks about sometimes those big trials and calamities are almost easier than just, our spouse irritating us, our teenager talking back, our toddler spilling, ketchup on the new rug or whatever it is. But talk a little bit about finding God with that, that big hardship, a physical challenge, a physical illness, and in general, your spirituality with trials and low spots ahead.
Yeah. My experience with my dad has been the key experience for me there, because I had so much self-will in it. And as I say, I went off-road spiritually with that, where I thought, the best thing for everyone involved in this would be my dad to just die. At one point I was actually going to do it. I was going to put him out of his misery, and kids were on the way, and I didn't want to do the prison time. But it's an awful thing to say, but he was in such suffering that I really thought that was the best way out. And fortunately I didn't do that. But what actually happened was, in the fullness of that experience, God really showed up. The last few years of my dad's life, he would have experienced bliss. He saw his kids, his grandkids. He absolutely doted on my daughter. So for me, when these big things come up, i.e. the heart condition, like, I have enough empirical evidence now that God's going to work this out. God is going to, God's plan is better than mine. My little plans and schemes are totally insignificant. So it's not as hard as it was for me previously to kind of accept God's will. And with my heart condition, I could still be here in 30 years, strong as an ox. It's treatable. It can be very frightening, but I've got a program that deals with fear. I've got a program set up and designed to deal with an alcoholic's fear. And so that's how I just need to apply that. I apply my, I apply the fear inventory aspect of the program to it. And see what comes. Now, having fellows around, having fellows who are on the spiritual path, who are full of enthusiasm, who I can bounce these things off, is really, really helpful. I really need my fellowship. Very often God will talk to me through my fellows, so I'll phone someone up with this fear about my heart, and then maybe they talk me down and point out how lucky I am. I spoke to one friend who had a really chronic health condition, and she said, "Look, people just live with stuff, Chris. Just get used to it." So I don't know if that answers the question, but yeah, 80% of my heart condition is fear, and I've got a program to deal with that. And then I have the best fellowship in the world to support me with it. So yeah, I try and make use of it as much as I can.
Wow. Wow. I'm a little bit in suspense, and sorry if I'm being dense or what changed with Dad? Like, I know somebody just posted the last question. We'll take for it in the chat. Well, how do you deal with sick family members, abusive family members? I mean, I'm pretty sure everyone in all fellowships has one or a couple of those. And I certainly relate. And I'm dealing with like wanting to go see my mom, even though she, putting the wrongs others have done aside entirely. We look at, I have to look at where am I forward, but what shifted for real, because how many times has mom been on your resentment list? How many times has dad been on your resentment list? And yet, I'm only speaking for myself and maybe whoever asked the question, it didn't go away,
Do you mean?
And I have a long list of therapists who said I was abused, right?
Yeah.
Verbal abuse, emotional abuse, blah, blah, blah. We've got all that going. And I see a man before me who had a spiritual experience with respect to dad, who had acceptance around dad, I think before he died, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. A few years before.
How'd you do it?
A lot of prayer, the grace of God. It's a spiritual program. It's not an intellectual program. So there was no way I was going to think my way around that stuff. God might change my thinking around it.
Wow.
That's not to say it wasn't, because the last few years.
I'm going to pause you right there. I just got this, and whoever is listening on the line, if I'm really in there with Chris D, what I just got is, I don't think it's going to be any better with mom. I don't really believe that God could help. See, Chris was helped because he, this is a real step 2, right? Came to believe, or was willing to believe. He was just willing to believe. See, if I'm going to visit my mom, but I really think that she's not, that she's spiritually sick and I need to keep praying for her. But it's all this, routine and ritual, but I don't really believe God could take it away. That's where that's the difference I'm seeing between this changed man before me and myself, or you on the line who still is contending with a parent who is not right. Sorry, I interrupted.
We ask God to build with us, don't we? So God does the building. We just, we need to do the work to do the resentments, get free of that.
Wow. Okay. So I think that's an amazing note to end on. Let's use our honesty, open-mindedness, and willingness. Let's be just willing and available for God to build us as He will. Christy, will you choose a prayer to pray us out here?
Yeah, I will. I'd love to choose the step 3 prayer. Such a beautiful prayer, so important, so powerful. Probably the most important. If I look at one of the most pivotal moments of my life, it was doing the step 3 prayer for the first time in 2005 with my first sponsor. My life has changed irrevocably since then. So, God, I offer myself to Thee to build in me and do with me as Thou wilt. Relieve me of the bondage of self, that I may better do Thy will. Take away my difficulties, that victory over them may bear witness to those I would help of Thy power, Thy love, Thy way of life. May I do Thy will. Amen.
Thank you. May we all go out from here. Thank you so much, Christy. This was amazing. And may we really all have the honor and the privilege of doing His will today and every day. Thank you.
I've seen stars fall from above. I've fallen in and out of love. I've been high and I've been low. Now I know I just can't do this on my own. I've seen a boy become a man. He got lost without a plan. He's so far away from home. Now I know I just can't do this on my own. just can't do this on my own. I'm looking for the words to say. You make the world a better place, and I can call that place my home. 'Cause now I know that I just can't do this on my own. Your arms surrounding me, your touch is grounding me. No longer searching for purpose all alone. 'Cause now I know that I just can't do this on my own. So let me see just what you need to set you free, so we can be. I saw stars fall from above. I fell in and out of love. I got high and I fell low. But now I know that I just can't do this on my own. No, I just can't do this on my own. I just can't do this on my own.